Welcome to Authored by Us, a podcast celebrating children's books about characters of color or of different cultural experiences, and the authors who bring these diverse works to life. Each week, we invite you to join us as we turn the pages of these bookshelf gems and hear from their creators who understand that stories of diverse experience truly come to life when authored by us. Here's your host, Zenzi Hodge.
Greetings, listeners, and thank you for joining us for this episode of Authored by Us. As we are coming upon Martin Luther King Jr. Day, a holiday in the United States celebrating the life and legacy of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., this episode's book is quite timely. In it, the main character deals with social injustice as he sees it unfolding on TV and in his community, and he turns to his family for inspiration as he pushes forward to make a change. I'm so happy that we are joined today by our guest author, Dr. Tasha Ellis, and she is the author of the book, #Enough. Welcome to the show, Tasha.
Thank you, and thank you for having me.
Now, Tasha, I'm just going to start commenting right off the bat at the title of your book. You incorporated a new aspect to writing, which is the hashtag. Tell us why you felt that was important to include in the title of your book.
Honestly, it would just, to me, it spoke to me in terms of the emphasis of we've simply had enough. Everything it's just been too much in terms of civil discourse and things that have taken place in society, not just in the year of 2020, but all the years prior to. So it was just we've simply had enough of injustice.
And the hashtag has become a symbol of emphasis. And I think that's a great place to put in the title of your book. So, Tasha, tell us a little bit about your book.
The book, #Enough, is about a tween, a young man coming of age. He is entering his teenage years. His name is Christopher. And he's grown up in this world where people like Dr. King envisioned and imagined all of us living in a multicultural society. So he grew up in this world where, all of his friends are various races. And, he is this child who is approaching the teenage years and discovers that there are some differences, even between he and his friends, as it relates to his color, his hue, as it relates to just things that he didn't really want to become privy to, or his parents didn't really want to have this discussion. So he realizes through the media that there are certain things that continuously happen to people that look more so like him.
I'm a parent of he's now a teenager, but it really spoke to me, the concept of writing a book that features a child of color that's a tween, because there are elements in here that make sense, that I can see making sense for my son. You start with the young man playing basketball and talking about the differences they have in their basketball stars and who they find to be their MVPs. But you also show connectedness because they are different hues and they come from different backgrounds, but there's also connectedness in their love of basketball and also what happens later in the story with them being connected in their social activism.
It was important for me, and it's just interesting for someone on the outside to see or to actually pinpoint what you were intentional about. So I was intentional about making sure that there is a commonality between us all, that we have things in common, yet there are painful differences as well.
And even though there are things in common and there are painful differences, we can still find some connection and have a shared experience.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
I found myself laughing at a point in your book, and it really took me back to childhood. I don't know if it was summertime, but in my head, this was summertime as they were playing outside. And I remember playing outside as a kid.
Mm-hmm.
And then his mom called him And she not only told him to come inside, but she told him to go take a bath because he smelled like outdoors. And
Exactly.
that just resonated with me. And it's something that a parent says to you.
Yes, yes. I am a Georgia peach. I live here. I grew up in California and Georgia, but Georgia is my home. This is where my primary home. And so there are certain things that we say that I've heard, and it's amazing how people can connect to them. But smelling out like outdoors is definitely something that people, especially people of color, can really laugh and say, "Oh my God," because it makes no sense, but it makes sense.
It absolutely does. And there is some parent right now listening and thinking about the smell of outdoors and saying, yes, I know what that is. And that
Mhm,
child needs to go and take a bath.
mhm.
You mentioned being a Georgia peach. And I spent several years living in Atlanta. And there's a part of your book where you give great tribute to the city of Atlanta, particularly Auburn Avenue. Why was that important to you?
Atlanta is my absolute heart. And in fact, the actual cover of the book is the backdrop of Atlanta. So Atlanta is my home. It is my heart. It is a place that I hold in high esteem. I am just a proud Atlantan. And so Auburn Avenue, if you know the history of Auburn, it was like a Wall Street for African Americans. It was where it was at one time the most prosperous street for African Americans. So people had the opportunity to be entrepreneurs and barter and things of that nature. And I believe that everything is going to come back around or is coming back around. The real estate here is has increased enormously, but there's a culture here that is undeniable, and a culture here that has not only vibrated and made Georgia proud, but made the world proud. So Auburn is something that just I grew up, my childhood church was Ebenezer Baptist. So my mom, I grew up in the suburbs, so I grew up in a diverse environment, but my mom was very intentional in having me experience what it was, the commonality and the pride of being an African American young lady in the South. So I went to Butler Street Y during the summer and things of that nature that were right in that Auburn Avenue area.
I remember Sweet Auburn Festival and just
Yeah,
spending time on Auburn Avenue. And you are right; it is at the heart of Atlanta. It's at the epicenter,
yeah,
and you bring up a lot of history, not just a history of geography, but history of people, because there's a part where you're telling history in the story, um, through the evolution of Christopher, but also through his interaction with his grandmother. And that's something that also spoke to me because she was able to share her experience of a particular from that particular instance that he is facing in the book and taking her back to a period of history for her and her interactions with someone of great importance in her time that you brought into the book as well.
absolutely. You know, it for me, my grandparents were very hands-on and were very much a part of my upbringing, and so I had those intergenerational conversations often, and that influence factor in my life, and that is something that I am, forever grateful for, but also defined by. And so for him to have this relationship with his grandmother in particular was just very important. But it was also a moment in where they could have a connection because even though I wanted to humanize the fact that Dr. King was a person and a father and not just a leader, but he also was a husband. He was also a brother. He was also an uncle. And, the fact that they lost someone so dear in their community through gun violence. I wanted to emphasize, the hurt that she experienced and the hurt that he's experiencing, and you would hope that things would be better. But it's a conversation that you don't want to have 2 generations later.
but that we sadly see ourselves having generations later.
Absolutely.
So as you talk about the multi-generational influence that was there in your life that you brought to the book, I also saw that somewhere else. And it was probably in the most unlikely place. It was with the introduction of music.
Hmm.
And I read this book with a playlist playing in my head. You talked about Marvin Gaye,
Hmm.
Prince, and Kendrick Lamar.
Hmm.
Why was it important for you to introduce music and those specific artists and those specific songs into your book?
Ah, wow. It's amazing because once again, I was very intentional about doing this. Marvin Gaye, I mean, was so ahead of his time. And the song What's Going On is still relevant today. And that is such a song. It was a song that was deemed as being controversial. And, Barry Gordy, from what I understand, I went to see the play and did not want this song to come out at the time. And he was just adamant about this being a song that needed to be, presented. And, you know, Marvin Gaye was just a genius, and he was brilliant in his music and his artistry, and just his life and all the challenges, the things that he overcame, and still had it's just amazing to know when you look at a person's history and you look at their story, how they still have it in them to give a message to inspire others. And so I think the song was so relevant because it was a song that we can still sing today, and every lyric is intact. And so, some may say he was a musical genius, other may say he was a prophet. It's just that fine line there. In addition, with Prince, with the song Sign of Times, I mean, that song is there's not one lyric in there till this day that is not applicable to today. And if you really study Prince, you understand him in a very different way. He was very intentional about making people aware, yet inspiring. And so these are just huge influences. And then you look at Kendrick Lamar. This guy, he's a brilliant person. He came up in Compton, California, grew up around gang members, yet he made a choice to, when he finished school, he was a straight A student. I mean, he's, just giving his life to God. It's so inspirational when people can see so many things that are disheartening, yet still have a positive message to give to others, to say it's going to be all right. I don't know what's going on, but I think it's going to be all right. And this is a sign of the times. But I think the underlying message was it's going to be all right. And I just wanted to make sure that we understood, that every generation has had this song of the world is in complete chaos, but we're going to be all right.
We're going to take a quick break, and when we return, we'll hear more from our author, Dr. Tasha Ellis.
Have a safe and happy new year from Authored by Us and your host, Zenzi Hodge. Like what you hear so far? Make sure you never miss a show by clicking the subscribe button now. Authored by Us is made possible by listeners like you. We thank you for your support. Now back to the show.
Now, you subtly touched on some other topics in your book that also stood out for me, and things that I find to be extremely important as you're an author of color, writing stories about children of color
Yeah.
for other children to consume, whether they are children of color or not. But the importance of having two Black parents in the household,
Oh,
um,
yes.
and then the multi generational family. and we did talk a little bit about the grandmother, but the multi-generational family piece was extremely important, because there are families that have grandparents or aunts and uncles. Even in my book, I pay tribute to my grandmother,
Yeah.
and because she was instrumental
Yeah.
in how we connected and worked in the kitchen and what that meant for us during the holidays. But there was something else that you added that I felt was also important. You touched on grief and loss, and that even as the grandmother was now a widow,
Yeah.
while she spent some time by herself, she spent time with family to bring that connection.
Yeah.
And that is extremely important in terms of how we take care of those in our community who've had a loss
Yeah.
such as that.
Yes. The matriarch and the patriarch of the family is so vital, and family is so important. And it's just one of those things that I just hold dear to my heart, that I had the kind of grandparents I did. I don't take it for granted. I don't take it lightly. And it is very important for people to know that people of color do value family. We do value family. We value love. We value God. We value education. The media will distort who we are. Where the reality is there's such a small percentage of us who don't value these things, if there are any. Because I think, a lot of times our voices are unheard, or you only see a specific chapter and you don't know the full truth. And so, I do want it to be known that we do value these things, not just materialism. We value family, love, God, um, and those things are highly important. And
And there's a piece of that connection that you introduced into this book that someone may not expect. But for me personally, I was happy to see. You and I, in our conversation, we talked about the fact that my late husband was a law enforcement officer.
yeah,
And Christopher's father in the story is a law enforcement officer.
yeah,
And so in this book, as you shared, it deals with what was happening in a particular time with violence towards people of color and the involvement of law enforcement in some of those acts of violence. Why was
yeah.
it important for you to have not only a character that's a law enforcement officer in your book, but the father, particularly this Black father with a Black son, as a police officer?
Here in Atlanta, I have been able to see so many people of color in positions. And, it's interesting because I feel as though it's important for us to understand that there is truth in people having fear. In some people, there is that fine line, law enforcement in particular, but there are also um, I don't believe in blanket statements. I don't want you to say, all teachers are this way, or all, pastors are this way, or all, there is good and bad. Just like one of the songs that I liked growing up with Paul McCartney and Stevie Wonder said, Ebony and Ivory, there's good and bad in everyone. So there's good and bad in everyone, everything. And so I don't want our children in particular to grow up in just constant fear. It's important for them to know that there are people out there who are for them. And there are people that they have to be, careful with. But here I've been able to see the chief of police who's been a person of color. I've been able to see that, and it hasn't been, necessarily a negative thing. And so it's interesting because I just felt that it was important for children to know that, one, they can aspire to any position they want to have, and that they can be that one that can make a difference, even if it is, a different type of situation. That, all police aren't a specific way, which has been because I've had people ask me questions about that, especially in the light of what's going on. And some weren't as favorable because some people believe that all police are a specific way, and I know that to not be true. I know that to not be true. I know that there are, and I did mention in there that there are some people that are crooked, but that's a personal choice, and that's throughout any profession.
So, Tasha, you're right. It's absolutely important that you make sure that your readers understand that there is a distinction. There's going to be good and bad in everything, but having a son with whose father is a police officer, a black police officer, and you have a black child, seeing a character in a book who mirrors his experience is extremely important. I think if you think back to the times where we looked at the death of Trayvon Martin, and my son was asking those questions of his father, what happened? Or when you look back to some of to the shooting of Mike Brown, and he looked to his father and asked what happened because he sees his father in uniform
Mhm.
and he knows what his dad looks like.
Mhm.
He knows what he looks like, and he is seeing himself in his father and trying to figure out, well, how does this work with this police officer and this person who looks like me and looks like my dad? And I think it's extremely important for a child who grows up with a law enforcement parent to find comfort and solace in a book where the author is saying we're not it doesn't mean that your parent is bad, and for them to be able to understand that there's a character that has the same experience as they do, and for readers who are not in that same situation to be able to turn and look at a friend who has a law enforcement parent and not instinctively think that, oh, that child's parent is bad because they are in law enforcement, but you see them in a different light, and I think that's extremely important.
The way a child, has reverence of their parent, or a third parent or any guardian in their life, it helps to form them. And so, you want them to know that there is, their parent, whoever in this case, the police officer, was with good intentions. He had the right intentions, and he did go into this to protect and to serve, and to do things in the way that he saw right in his
Mhm.
eyes.
So, Tasha, what this is your first book, why was this particular story so important for you to tell?
Oh my gosh, it was too important not to tell. The we have to look at things through our children's eyes as well, our young people, and see, and try to connect, because we don't want them to internalize things. And I think it's meaningful. It's just good to have meaningful dialogue about things that are not comfortable. It's not comfortable to talk about racial injustice. It's not comfortable to talk about, these things. And I wanted to do this in such a way where it preserved dignity, but at the same time told the truth. And so our kids are brighter than we realize. They have access to things, and we want them to, be able to understand that they have the right to feel the emotions they feel about what is going on, because even as adults we can't process all of this hate and this violence. And so I did so in a way because I want this to be one of those things that is not brushed off, that this is an important conversation, because it can go in one or two directions. A child can become enraged and not talk about it, and and act out, or a child can have confidence in this moment and say, I can make a difference.
I like that. I like that you are hoping that this will inspire a child to have confidence
Yes,
in this moment and make a difference.
yes,
And you left your readers with a call to action, a
yes.
call to social action. So, why was this important for you to do for these young readers?
I voting and having a voice has been something that is has been just really something has been a foundation for me. My grandfather was at Morehouse at the time, Dr. King. He was active in civil rights engagement, civil rights movement in Albany, Georgia. And so he started the NAACP chapter there. He was one of the ones to start the NAACP chapter in Albany, Georgia. Was involved with the movement there, so on and so forth. My mother and my aunt were registering voters as children. So at 8 years old, my mother was registering people to vote. And so I know I don't take the right to vote lightly. It's not something that I've ever been passive about. It's something that I know people sacrifice so that I can have this right. And, children can play a part, even if they cannot vote, they can still actively be a participant. They can register people to vote. And it's so important for us to build these things for our children, to build our communities, and to help our children understand the importance of voting, financial choices, what each office entails, and not just the presidential voting is important, but voting on the local level. So many things. And so you see what happens when we get out and vote. Right here in Georgia, we are in the midst of
Of seeing what happens when we vote. Absolutely.
absolutely.
We'll be right back with more from Dr. Tasha Ellis.
Are you looking for a fun and interactive way to connect with your loved ones in this virtual environment? If so, look no farther. Personalized Paintings offers virtual paint parties, complete paint kits, and sketch canvases. You provide the people, we'll provide all the supplies that are needed. We also give step-by-step instructions, so no experience is needed. Visit our website today at www.personalizedpaintings.net for more information. That website again is www.personalizedpaintings.net. We cannot wait to create memories with you.
You're listening to Authored by Us. Don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review so you never miss an episode. Now back to the show with your host, Zenzi Hodge.
So, Tasha, I would be remiss if I didn't mention this. You are also an alumna of the Florida A&M University.
Best school ever.
I absolutely agree with you, where
Yeah,
you received your degree in elementary education. So,
yeah.
obviously, you knew you wanted to teach, but did you always know you wanted to write?
Actually, that is, I actually started out in the School of Journalism. So I wanted to write. And so I have a dual major. I have public relations and education. I did not go in to teach, I wanted to be a lawyer. So I started volunteering on campus and working with children at the school across the street from FAM and seeing the impact of helping children learn to read. um, that just really changed my heart. So I changed my major later, and so I have a dual major, but I do journalism is writing, and the things that you can do with that are just always dear to my heart. But I did not know I was going to author, so that came out of that was just a great surprise.
Well, now that you are a writer and you're also a teacher, what do you think inspires the next generation of writers?
I think what inspires them is seeing writing. I think it's important for our world to see writing that reflect that has a piece of them, whether it be their thoughts, whether it be this is someone who looks like me, whether it be that, or them to say, hey, I don't agree with that, but I want to write back, I want to have a rebuttal, but an intelligent rebuttal. So I think there are several different things that can inspire our new writers. And right now we just have so much to write about as it relates to events that are happening in the world, and just who you are in this world right now.
So, Tasha, tell us where we can find your book.
My book is available. It is #Enough by Tasha Ellis, EdD. But I have an educational doctorate, and that's TASHAELLIS EdD. And it is available on Amazon. It is available on BarnesandNoble.com, and it is available with Apple where you can upload it. So I have 3 places where you can purchase this wonderful book, and I appreciate everyone's support with it.
And not to worry, listeners, we will have links to Tasha's book and where you can find it available in our podcast notes. Now, Tasha, what book had the most impact on you as a child?
Honestly, the book that still has the most impact on me is the Bible. That is a book that has had the most impact on me. One of my favorite books to this day is actually Sister Soldier's book, The Coldest Winter. And I say that because it was such a book. She wrote in such a way where you could see the illustrations. You could see, you could feel the impact of the characters. And that is a book that really, I was like, wow, I like to read, and there are several books that are influential, but that was a book that really made me want to, it allowed me to see things in a very different way. So I have so many books that I like, so many different types of genres that I'm interested in, but the one that's been most influential with me would be the Bible.
Now, what has been the greatest influence on you as a writer and on your writing?
Greatest influence on me as a writer has been my family, and I would say my grandparents and my parents in particular. That has been my greatest influence. It is just my heart's joy to bring joy to them, and now 3 of them are angels, and my mom is here, and so I think that was my greatest. Yeah, definitely so.
Tasha, it has truly been a pleasure having you here with us today on our Authored by Us podcast. Your book, #Enough, gives so many nuggets to young readers, to parents that want to be able to have conversation with their children about what's going on in our community, how they handle it, and how they too can be change agents and activists.
Mm-hmm.
So thank you so much for joining us, Tasha.
Thank you so much for having me. I am truly honored. Thank you.
Before we close, I'd like to say Happy Founders Day to the lovely ladies of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated as we celebrate 108 years of sisterhood, scholarship, and service. So to you, Tasha, a happy Founders Day, and thank you for being with us today.
Thank you, Sora. Happy Founders Day to you as well.
Thank you. Well, listeners, this closes the book on another episode of Authored by Us. I would like to thank our guest this week, Dr. Tasha Ellis, for sharing her book, #Enough, with us. Remember, you can find that book on Amazon.com and also on BarnesandNoble.com. A special thank you to this episode's sponsor, Personalized Paintings. If you're looking to bring your creative talents to your canvas, contact the team at Personalized Paintings. Their website is personalizedpaintings.net. Finally, we'd like to say a special thank you to you, our listening audience, for joining us on our Authored by Us podcast. We would not be able to produce this podcast without you and your support. So until next week, happy reading.
Thank you for joining us for today's episode of Authored by Us. Every author has a story to tell, and we enjoy bringing their stories to you each week. Whether you are listening as a young reader or are sharing this podcast with the young readers in your life, we are delighted to celebrate these stories inspired by diversity and shared in the voice of their authors. Follow us on social media at Authored by Us and subscribe to our podcast using your favorite podcast app. That way you never miss an episode. Have a gem on your bookshelf that we should have on ours? Visit us online at authoredbyus.com and let us know. Until next time, happy reading.